Hello, I am Aviva-Rossi, and this talk is about the predicted geographic range shifts for small mammals in the high elevation Sierra Nevada under predicted climate change. So, as a quick refresher, climate is a very important determinant of species geographic distributions. If the climate of an area changes, so will its suitability for many of the species living there. Many of those species will shift their geographic range to track suitable climate conditions. And it's often assumed that species will move to higher altitudes or higher latitudes to escape the effects of a warming climate. However, those poleward shifts are not always the case for all species. Looking into the fossil record and at studies that looked at range changes over the last 100 years, different species were found to respond differently to these changing climate conditions. So when we look at what might happen in the future, in the shifts that species experience are unlikely to be uniform. Now, there are management implications to these shifting ranges. Being able to more accurately predict how individual species might change in their distribution is important for management. It will help identify which species might be in peril due to loss of suitable areas before those changes occur. And this is especially important for high elevation mammals. These mammals tend to be particularly vulnerable to climate change. They often have very specific physiological tolerances, and they're limited in their ability to disperse to new areas. Many of them have limited mobility and they're not going to fly from mountaintop to mountaintop. And species that depend on montane meadows can face additional challenges as the changing hydrologic regime is predicted to result in drying and tree encroachment, so loss of many of these meadows. The Sierra Nevada mountain range in California runs along the eastern portion of the state for about 600 kilometers. This is a high elevation region. Many of the peaks in this range are above 3,000 meters, and climate change is already impacting this region. Over the last 100 years, in portions of it, the average temperature has been documented to increase by 3 degrees Celsius already. And there have been changes to precipitation patterns, resulting in changes to snow cover and hydrology. And these changes are predicted to continue along with predicted climate change, leading to ongoing drying, ongoing changes to the snowpack. This could also impact many of those high elevation meadows. The Sierra Nevada also has many small mammals that could be directly or indirectly impacted by these changes. So we know that high elevation species are vulnerable to climate change, and that the climate change in the Sierra Nevada has already been changing and with more changes predicted. So how might that affect the distribution of small mammals in this region? To answer this question, among others, we conducted a study of the small mammals in the high elevation region of the Sierra Nevada. This blue polygon is our study area, and it covered nearly the entire subalpine and alpine portions of the Sierra Nevada. And we studied 4 species total. 3 species of ground-dwelling squirrels, the Belding's ground squirrel, yellow-bellied marmot, and golden-mantled ground squirrel. And in addition, we threw in a lagomorph for good measure, the American pika. All 4 of these species are generally sympatric in their range in California. They're diurnal. And interestingly, although the ground squirrels have been fairly well studied for aspects of their physiology and behavior, much of their natural history information in regards to environmental drivers of distribution was anecdotal and qualitative, which is difficult to generate accurate models using. 2 of the species are thought to be meadow dependent, the Belding's ground squirrel and the yellow-bellied marmot. And 1 is more of a generalist, the golden-mantled ground squirrel. And the pika are known to have rocks as a very important habitat component. And they're comparatively well studied, and so they provide a good reference for the other species as well. Locations of each of the 4 species was collected by visual observation during walking transects. We established 21 transects. Each of these transects was 10 kilometers in length, and each of them were surveyed multiple times during a given year. And overall, our project was surveyed over 4 consecutive years from 2009 to 2012. This blue polygon again shows the study area, and it generally aligns with the range of these species in the Sierra Nevada. And our transects are these green squiggly lines that are distributed throughout the project area. During this time, we collected a total of 6,819 observations spread across those four individual species. In addition to the species data, the predictor variables that we used to build our models were based on a combination of land cover, topography, and climate variables. All of those variable types are known to influence the geographic distribution of species. The spatial data layers for land cover were obtained from CalVeg. The topography variables were derived from USGS data layers. And for the climate, we used the bioclim variables in the WorldClim database for both current and future climates. For both of these, we used the approximately 1 kilometer resolution data. And for the future climate predictions, we averaged 3 general circulation models for use in the species distribution model based on the year 2070. For the species distribution model, we used a random forest algorithm. And this generates the probability of occurrence based on the observed occurrences of those species and the environmental variables at those locations. The random forest algorithm is one of the best performing algorithms to predict species distributions based on this type of data, based on occurrence data. The first step in our results was to get an idea of which types of variables are the most important in determining distribution. So if you recall from earlier, we had topographic, land cover, and climate variables. These plots show the relative importance of the top 10 predictor variables from the random forest models. And this is shown as a measure of improvement in model error, known as the Gini impurity across the random forest models. So the Gini impurity is shown on the x-axis. The higher the number, the more important the variable. So we found that topographic variables were the most important predictor of occurrence for all 4 species, in particular terrain, ruggedness, and slope. Land cover was the second most important group of predictor variables, although the importance of specific land cover types differed by species, with meadows being most important for Belding's ground squirrel and yellow-bellied marmot, as predicted. Conifers were most important for the golden-mantled ground squirrel, and rocks were the most important for the American pika. So the remaining predictor variables included all of the climate variables and the remaining land cover types. The most important climate variable for all of the species was the bioclim layer bio4, which represents temperature seasonality. So the next step was we used these tools to model areas of suitability in this region and how those might change in the future. So I'm going to walk through the results of each species individually and then summarize the changes overall. This is the model distribution for our most meadow-dependent species, the Belding's ground squirrel. Each of these polygons show the shape of our study area. The polygon on the far left here shows you the current suitability. The bluer an area, the more suitable it is. If it's white, it's not considered suitable. This center map shows you the areas of predicted suitability by the year 2070, around 50 years from now. So the map on the far right shows you the change. In this map, areas in red are areas with decreased suitability, and areas with blue are areas of increased suitability. So the predicted areas of current suitability for the Belding's ground squirrel was concentrated along the crest of the Sierra Nevada. But the Belding's ground squirrels are predicted to experience the greatest loss of suitable areas among our 4 species due to climate change. And they'll have fragmentation of the remaining suitable areas. So you can see here from our current to 2070, there's many more white spaces, which indicates lack of suitability. So this finding is in agreement with earlier predictions, both of substantial loss of suitable area and loss of connectivity for this species in the Sierra Nevada. And the Belding's ground squirrels have already experienced range contractions in the Sierra Nevada. And our predictions indicate that if climate change continues along the current trajectory, the future of this species in the Sierra Nevada is uncertain at best. But on a more positive note, the predictions are not so dreary for the yellow-bellied marmot. Just like with the Belding's ground squirrels, the predicted areas of suitability for the yellow-bellied marmot were concentrated along the crest, the high elevation portions of the Sierra Nevada. But our future predictions include only a very minimal loss of suitable habitat, with much of that being along the western slopes, and an increase in suitability in areas of upper elevation Sierra Nevada. And notably different than the other two ground squirrels, we predicted widespread suitability for the golden-mantled ground squirrels currently and in the future. But with the golden-mantled ground squirrels, the higher areas of suitability were on the western slopes with lower along the crest. But by 2070, they should have gains along the crest without losing very much at all along the lower elevation slopes. So based on our findings, suitability for golden-mantled ground squirrel could increase throughout their range in this region by 2070, and they should not be decreasing their distribution. And last, but definitely not least, is the American pika. So our predictions showed a little bit of a higher density of suitable areas along the lower elevations, along the southern portion of our study area. And the loss of suitable area by 2070 would be in these lower elevation regions to either side of the crest. So a number of other studies have identified current and future suitable areas for American pikas, as well as their drivers of distribution and possible reasons for extirpations. However, those studies often either excluded all or most of our study area, or they looked at much larger extents at coarser scales. And our study area includes one of the few areas within the range of this species, within the continental range of this species, where American pikas are predicted to persist even if temperatures increase by even 5 to 7 degrees Celsius. And because of that, our study area could be an important refugia for this species. By 2070, although we do predict a shift in suitable areas to those higher elevation regions, other studies have found that American pika shifted their range higher in elevation, both since the last glacial maximum, as well as the last 100 years. So although there's only been limited range shifts documented in the Sierra Nevada to date, our results and those earlier records indicate that these shifts are probable. Although at least by the year 2070, substantial areas of suitable habitat will be remaining for this species. So to summarize, as anticipated, the pattern of gain and loss of suitable area was unique to each of these species. It was different. And that difference resulted from their distribution being driven by different variables, which was most important, driving their own distribution. The suitable area that was gained is shown here in blue, and the suitable area that was lost is shown in red. You notice that there's both, and that's because it's not just a net. There are some areas with that decrease, and there's some areas that will gain. So golden mantled ground squirrels and yellow-bellied marmots were both predicted to have a net gain of suitable area, while the Belding's ground squirrels and the American pika are both predicted to have a net loss, with the Belding's ground squirrel being most heavily impacted. So it's important to note that while some species don't show a large change when looking at net loss, such as the American pika, there is a big change that's happening. There's a big change to which areas are suitable, and not all of the predicted newly suitable areas may be accessible to the existing populations. And all 4 species we evaluated were predicted to lose at least some suitable area within this region by the year 2070. The area of gain primarily occurred along the crest of the Sierra Nevada. And so the crest of the Sierra Nevada will likely be an important regional refugium under projected climate change for these species, assuming suitable land cover persists. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to questions during the discussions.